Shoulder-to-shoulder military exercises between the U.S. and the Philippines are underway. This year's are announced to be the biggest under Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. We'll ask our panelists what the drills mean for regional security right after this break. You're watching World Insight. Now let's turn to U.S.-Philippine military drills, dubbed as Balikatan, or shoulder-to-shoulder in Filipino. The exercise began on Monday and were expected to run until May the 18th. This year marks the 34th Balikatan exercise. So what is the aim of the U.S.-Philippines drills, and what is President Rodrigo Duterte's policy on the exercise? Before our discussion, take a look at this information.
Around 8,000 Philippine and U.S. troops kicked off annual military drills on Monday. That includes an exercise on a part of Luzon Island facing the disputed South China Sea.
Now, by the authority vested in me as the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, I hereby declare the Philippine-U.S. Exercise Balikatan 34-28 formally open.
The Balikatan exercises were first carried out in 1991, and the purpose is to maintain and develop the security relationship between the two countries' armed forces. Japan and Australia were also invited to join this year's military drills.
This year's Balikatan will not only focus on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, which are of course very important here in the Philippines, but also will incorporate training identified in the post-Marawi action reports, such as military operations in urban terrain.
Philippine officials were quick to point out they are not aimed at China, but at the threat of urban terrorism and other man-made crises and natural disasters. Former Philippine President Benigno Aquino III has taken a more adversarial policy on China, the only president who brought China to court over a dispute involving the South China Sea. China-Philippine relations have improved since current President Rodrigo Duterte was elected in 2016. Last year, Balikatan and several other annual joint military exercises between Philippine and U.S. forces had almost been called off, after Mr. Duterte said he would not want to offend China by holding the exercises. These will be the largest joint drills since Duterte took office. The Philippines is an important U.S. ally in the Pacific.
Well, if you are looking at our program today, we are talking about, in our second topic, about the drills between the United States and also the Philippines. We are joined in our studio by Mr. Zhang Junshe, Vice President of the China Naval Research Institute. Sir, welcome to our program. In Manila, we have Lucio Blanco Pitlo III, who is a lecturer at the Chinese Studies program of the Ateneo de Manila University. And in Washington, D.C., U.S., we once again have Richard White, who's a senior fellow and director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. I want to welcome to the three of you. Beginning from you, Mr. White, are we looking at a procedural joint military exercises between the two countries, or this is something much more significant than earlier times, particularly under the current president of the Philippines?
I think you phrased the question well. What we're seeing is, even under the new president, a continuation of long-standing Philippine-U.S. defense ties, including arms sales, visits by major warships, and these exercises. It's true that the last couple years there was a lot of rhetoric saying that these exercises might end, and they were scaled back somewhat. This time, they're larger than they were last year, but not as large as they might had been in some earlier iterations. What's new, perhaps, is there's a greater multilateralization. The Australians, the British, and others are participating as well. And you can read that two ways. It makes them somewhat more important, but it also can be seen as sort of diluting the the U.S.-Philippine direct connection by embedding this in a kind of multilateral framework.
I see.
So in a way, it satisfies both parties.
I see. Take a look at this, what you have just mentioned, the scale of the drills. Based on the report we have, the annual Balikatan military exercise has a bigger U.S. contingent from 2,400 in the year 2017 to 3,000 this year. 5,000 Filipino soldiers will join them. Australia and Japan were invited to take part, but they are only sending 60 and 20 military observers respectively. That's what we are talking about for this year. So let me go to you, Mr. Pitlo III from the Philippines. More significant than previous years or almost the same?
Well, I think the exercises this year jives with the President's independent foreign policy, friends to all and enemies to none. And at the same time, the alliance was able to demonstrate that it can respond to changing demands, and that wherever Philippine national interests has confluence with or convergence with allies like the U.S., in this case on the issue of counterterrorism, I think the alliance shows its vitality and its ability to adapt.
It is alliance, and it is allies alone, right? Mr. Zhang, how is China looking at this joint military exercise? We always remember South China Sea could be a very sensitive and also fundamental issue for China.
Well, actually, we can see some slight difference in the interpretations of the joint military exercise from the U.S. side and the Philippines side. On one hand, I think the Western media and the Western analysts are actually hyping up the importance of the exercise. They are emphasizing the importance and the solidarity between the United States and the Philippines. Actually, it's not true. And we can see from the Philippines officials what they have been saying. They said that this year's annual exercise will be focused on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and anti-terrorism. We can see also they have scrapped some items that were included in previous exercises, including the taking back of the islands that were presumably seized by other countries, probably China.
But and this is not in the itinerary anymore?
We don't see the items in this year.
I see. But on the other hand, Mr. Zhang, if I could just follow up by asking you, we understand the U.S. President Donald Trump is looking at his best way of thinking, which is making deals. So when it comes to deals, there's always an exchange. You give and you take. So people worry whether all kinds of issues are being put on the table by his strategy, including about the issue of South China Sea. For example, when he's dealing with China on the other issues, trade or DPRK. So, Mr. Zhang, from China's perspective, what do you make of the latest development in the South China Sea regarding the United States and China? Mr. Zhang.
Well, I think just as previous administrations, the current administration of the United States is also trying to use the South China Sea dispute as a tool to contain China. And they want to use the Philippines as a chessman in their strategy containing China. But we can see some difference in the Philippines' foreign policy. Mr. Duterte, since he took office in 2016, he has taken a more independent foreign policy toward China and also toward the United States.
I see.
It doesn't want to become a chessman in the games of the Americans containing China. So we have seen that the Philippines government has publicly said that the Philippines will not follow the United States in the so-called joint patrol in the South China Sea.
Mr. Pitlo III, can Philippines have a final say about what is the nature of this joint military exercise and also what is eventually going to turn out to be the content of this joint military exercise and possibly even its impact?
Yeah, I think the Philippine government under the Duterte administration has a very strong say in the nature and the tempo of the exercises for this year as well as of the last year. So we would see that compared to previous years where there's a lot of emphasis on maritime security and external defense, last year and this year was more on non-traditional security threats like disaster response, humanitarian assistance, and then this year the emphasis on counterterrorism, which is very relevant considering that it's just several months ago when the Philippines was able to recapture the city of Marawi from the clutches of militants. So I do think that the content and the nature of the exercises of this 34th iteration of the U.S. Philippines Balikatan exercises will be, to a large extent, determined by Philippine national interests and the convergence with the interests of allied countries like U.S., Australia, in terms of dismantling the international network of terrorism.
I see. Mr. Weiss, though, let me put the question to you as well. I mean, when you see, for example, the rise of China in the Asia-Pacific region, when you see China and the United States in negotiation with one another about the nature of its relations, how do you see U.S. relations with its allies, including the Philippines, evolving in recent years, particularly now? Will that have an impact about the U.S. military so-called future interaction with the Philippines? Mr. Weiss.
Clearly, under the current Philippine president, there's been an effort to, at least at the rhetorical level, move away from the U.S., move closer to China and Russia. And that has had some impact, but the exercises we're seeing now show that the U.S.-Philippine security ties still remain pretty strong. Overall, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact because the Philippines is not that important for the U.S. anymore. I mean, I think the major partners the U.S. has in Asia are Japan, South Korea, Australia, and then developing ties with Vietnam, some ties with Singapore, and so on, and that includes ties with the Philippines. But I just think they're a second order of magnitude. And I think that the Philippines could fully ally with China or Russia, and it still wouldn't make much of an impact on regional politics.
We have
from the defense perspective.
I see. We have less than a minute to go, so let me ask you once again, Mr. Pitlow, about that. How is Philippines designing its future with U.S. in the region and also certainly with China?
Well, I do think that the present government has a very clear stance in defining its relations with China independent of that of the U.S. And the same goes with its relations with the U.S. So it's trying to carve its own autonomous space within this great power contest, which is not an easy thing to do, but something that the government has to really be good at. So I think the Duterte administration is treading this path of making sure that this kind of exercises will not be in any way seen by China as directed against her, considering the improving relations. And that the issue with the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, there's already an ongoing mechanism to handle that. So I think the Duterte administration prefers that kind of approach, the bilateral consultation mechanism. So I think that track will continue.
Okay, we are running out of time for now, but I want to express my appreciation for the three of you gentlemen for being with us. Lucio Blanco Pitlow III coming from the Philippines, Mr. Zhang Junshe from China, and Mr. Richard Weiss coming from the U.S. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it. And with that, we're coming to the end of today's program. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.